I'm just exporting a database there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So again, thanks to CITA for giving us time here just to talk to you about some tools, because we've heard about the requirements, and now it's maybe just to, well, how do I get to that, or how do I produce the information that's required? So unfortunately, I don't have any score like Michael. I don't even have PowerPoint, so you're going to have keep looking at a Revit model. But every time Michael mentions Autodesk and Revit, it's music to my ears, Michael. So long may it continue, you know. So just very quickly then, what I'm here to kind of, or the points I want to make, really is that in this BIM environment, we're creating a huge amount of information. And that information needs to be managed. And I suppose the point I'm trying to get across here is that for a lot of people that can be overwhelming, but it also can be an opportunity, especially if you can get to the information that's important to you. So I think people need to provide that information, in the correct format, at the right stage, about the information that's required. I suppose that's what the EIR is asking for. But I suppose at the end of the day, Revit is really just a database of information. Okay, it has some nice visuals, and I just want you to obviously have a look at that and appreciate what you can produce. But it's really the information that's in there that's important, and it's important that the people in your organization can input that information. Back to the idea of it being overwhelming, some people find it hard to interact with the Revit model and hard to input the information. Ralph made a good point earlier on about the people with the gold. Basically, they make the decisions. What I think in this environment is the people with the knowledge that are important. So we have lots of very good modelers, I suppose, but maybe the information they're inputting isn't at the highest level. So it's trying to make that accessible. So when it comes to like training and getting people to that level, you need to be able to know what a Revit model produces. You need to be able to look at the objects that it produces. And like when we look at a wall and we start to see the information there to do with like volume, height, location, we talked about coordinates earlier on, that's very important. But even inside in that then, you need to know what properties are, what instance properties are, what type properties are. And this is very important if you're going to change this information down the line. You need to know how it affects the complete model and what's coming out of it. And even if we were to just delve into a little bit of, even the materials, picking a material might seem, like it's not that important. But if we look at a material, that can not just be a graphical thing, but can also have some physical attributes. So from a structural point of view, you have to get your physical attributes right. From an energy point of view, you have to get your thermal aspects right. So, this is all important information that people kind of maybe forget a little bit about, and they maybe ignore it, and then it maybe is used for analysis, or it's used to produce heating and cooling calculations, and then we may have to redress it. So all this information needs to be input at a very early stage correctly. And it can be obviously changed around as the project develops, but that's the important thing. So how then, I suppose, do you integrate with that, or how do you work with the model? Because as I said previously, not everybody is comfortable in that environment. So I think you need to make it accessible to people. Now in Revit, it's very simple to get at the data. I mean, you can just select something like I did, and if I just zoom in here and select this piece of equipment here, it's got properties in there to do with its name, its manufacturer. If I look at its type, it's maybe got some additional assembly codes in there. So that's simple enough to get to. But maybe that's not for everyone. And maybe this model it's quite an easy view to interrogate. So you should start looking at other ways of looking at the information. And where I'm getting to here is like looking at schedules. So at any point in time, we can create a schedule very, very quickly to just graphically see, well, look, I'll just do something very simple here, like lighting fixtures, say. And we just do a very quick schedule. I know for the Revit users, they will be used to this. And we might just take things off, like, say, go with the family. We'll take maybe the type as to importance. And we just take maybe the manufacturer and the model. So again, this is very quick, but I'm just very quickly getting that information. Now it's in a textual format that I can then start to look at, and I can maybe start changing manufacturer at this level, or changing the model and all that. So again, maybe the fixture itself hasn't changed, maybe it has, but the information is what's key here. And that's the important bit that I'm trying to get across. So you can kind of see where I'm going. What I want you to start looking at now is, I mentioned earlier Revit is a database. So can I just get a show of hands, how many people use Revit in the room? So quite a lot. So how many people have linked Revit to a database, Microsoft Access or something like that? So not that many. But when you start to look at Revit from that point of view, it becomes a little bit more accessible. What you should be looking at then is maybe some of the add-ins to be able to do that. And there's one here called Revit DB Link, and that was what I was exporting just before you saw me getting up to do it. And I just want to give you an idea maybe then of what that would look like in a database format. So again, it's all information really. Let's just pop it in here. Actually, I had it open, just give me a chance. Let's see, go Kobe. So this was the database that was exported. You see the time, 10:15. And now we're seeing Revit in a different kind of guise. And if we start to drill into the database, you're seeing the type of information it's giving you. But this isn't just one direction, this is bi-directional. So you can give somebody access to the database. Maybe they're not into access, well then just export it out and make it accessible to them in Excel. They can input information there and get that passed through the database and passed back into the model. So it starts to update the model. And that could be something like for door schedules or something very simple. But it's the person inputting the information has the knowledge and they know what they're doing, as opposed to somebody who's just modeling, picking a door they like, putting it in, and the information is incorrect. So that idea, and when you have Revit in a database format like this, you can do anything with the information. You can start interrogating it. You may have seen some graphic information about how far a model may have developed or something like that. You can do that in this database. You can see how many components are in the model today, how many components are in the model tomorrow, and then graphically start feeding it back. Not just, in a form like this, but we might start creating forms. And when you start getting into forms, let's actually go with some of the pre-cooked ones. I'll do it very quickly. Should be one there. Should be one on that. Oh yeah. Never do anything live. That was this, eh? So very quickly, create a form. I'll just go with that one. No, it's not coming up. But basically what I'm looking for here is graphical input, like graphs, where I can see, the development as the model goes, and still input the information. So that's just a small thing, but I think it's something you should start looking at. So again, you get that link, the DB link, it's on subscription. If you have it, just go to your subscription site, download it. The little caveat, I suppose, is that if you're running 64-bit Revit, you need to be running 64-bit Office as well for the two to work together. If you're not, you just keep clicking on it forever and it just won't work. There's a small thing you can upload. So that's one thing. The other information, I suppose, that you tend to be asked for is a lot of COBie information, and COBie is a format, I suppose, coming from the US. The US government or the UK government mandated it, and really it's a subset of IFC. And the format they've asked for is Excel format. And they provide you with all the templates that you can actually manually go in and fill out COBie data, but I don't know any company who's manually doing it, and it just doesn't make sense. So what you can do inside in the Revit model environment then, and you've probably seen something like this before, is that you can actually use the COBie Toolkit, okay? So again, it's an add-in, you run the setup, probably had time to run it, probably don't now, but I'll run it just very quickly. So you saw earlier on there when I was to select one of these objects, it has its own properties, okay? Instance properties, type properties. There's no COBie information in there. So you first of all had to run through a bit of a setup. And for anybody who creates Revit content and creates Revit families, they know exactly what we're talking about here. So very quickly, you create contents. I'm just going to import a couple of contents, contacts. Replace the current ones is fine. So again, the reason you do that is that every object within a COBie spreadsheet has to have a contact associated with it. So that's the first thing. Save and close it. And then we go into settings. And this is just a few tabs. I'm not going to go run through it all. But obviously things like units, things like the class you want to use, things like unique identifiers, global identifiers. We won't get into family types and descriptions, but this is all about the naming conventions used. Units, use the Revit default. If it's Imperial, it'll switch it across. Naming is important. Revit uses spaces and rooms, spaces for MEP, rooms for architects. They can have the same name, they can have the same number. We have a utility to make sure that happens, which is good, but then when it comes to a COBie spreadsheet, you may want to start appending ARC or MEP to either, so that you have differentiation between the locations of objects. So small stuff like that. Spaces listed, COBie system names. Again, systems, hugely important for managing. And I suppose where the COBie is going is the FM side and the management side. So they have requirements. So that's why we're clicking on these. And again, just exporting components corresponding. There's a lot of information there to do with naming and that. Going with element ID here, so I can get unique ones. Spaces, talked about it. We know what they are. We can select rooms for all, spaces for all, spaces are rooms, and it associates, obviously air terminals or spaces with things like doors, windows or rooms. So this is all pretty much set up. There's a lot more setup I can do, go through parameters you might want, extras, coordinates are hugely important, but not so much here, just bounding boxes. And then these schedules get created in Revit. We don't need them, but they're handy afterwards for interrogating the data and maybe adding to it. You know, so adding in the the maintenance dates and all that we require for the equipment before we export it out. And when we finalize it and we finish it, it then just starts to run through and it'll just add all that parameter information to the objects. So it takes a little while, and that's why I know we're a little bit tight for time. But don't be disappointed if you run it and it's blank, okay? Because nothing has been added from an information point of view. All we've done is we've just added in the COBie parameters. So if you now look at these objects, you have all these COBie names, COBie space, COBie description, and then we've type information, which is COBie information too. So then what you got to do is, you got to then start to go back in and run the modify setup. And once you do that, and again, I know we're tight for time, there's a few more additions in there that you need to just map properties. But once you run that, you'll then get all the information. And the last step is then to export it back out. So you're then exporting it back out to Excel, and then the data sheets that you're required to produce are filled in for you. So again, that's a very quick overview of it, but you're required to produce this information. You have it in the model, most of it. Obviously there's some manual you have to add, so you might as well do it in 5 minutes as opposed to take a couple of days to do it. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about was just IFC in that, and a little bit about that. You may be required to produce IFC. From a Revit point of view, from an Autodesk point of view, we're 2x3 compliant for the export, so that's where we sit. If you want to make sure you're producing the required output, I'll just jump into Internet Explorer, it's easy to show you here. You need to be downloading this little toolkit here. So it's a free IFC exporter. It keeps you up to date with all the developments that Autodesk are doing for IFC during the year. I think this year there was 11 updates. So by downloading the toolkit and keeping it updated, you're getting the latest enhancements every time. And then you get additional options. So when you're inside in Revit then, and very quickly if it comes back here, and you want to export to IFC, you get a different user interface. You get to choose some of the options that you export out or not. And just be careful, because sometimes you'll export out and there'll be information missing. It's because the tick box hasn't been ticked. It's not that it can't do it, it's just that the box hasn't been done or the mapping hasn't been created. So that's quite important too, to get IFC up and running. And the last bit then, just on the COBie toolkit, when you do install it, I just found during the year, you can install it from our own website here. So again, all of these, we can give you the links. You can install the COBie toolkit. But the guys who produced this though are guys called from CAD Microsystems, and they actually have a version of it on their website as well. Now they're meant to be the same, but I found the one they have is just a little bit more up to date than what we have. So again, if you do want to use it, I would take it from their website. And one other thing they have as well, and it would have been nice to kind of get to show you this as well, because a lot of the information we produce, it needs to be checked. And there are some model checkers out there we've come across. Well, they actually produce their own Revit model checker. And from what I can see, this is free. And what it does is, it starts to look at the COBie information. And if there's some missing, that's just one thing it does, it starts to tell you, look, that field should be filled in. If you want to be compliant, you need to start looking at why isn't the field filled in. So that's a useful checker. I would say download it, have a look at it, and see it using. So that was extremely quick, but I knew I was between you and your coffee. So yeah, thank you very much, and any of the links we'll send them off.